Well, I was interviewed for this before I saw the full report, and I have since read it all carefully. So that's based on some of the stats that came out of the original porn phenomenon 2016, which would have been done 2015, basically a decade ago now, and my other research on this topic. This study has made me rethink that and wonder how many Christians really understand how deeply unbiblical and unethical pornogaphy is. Now, I do think in one sense, I stand by the statement that I don't think there's many Christians out there, at least self-identifying Christians, who are going to make a case that pornography is okay or it's good. There, part of these studies are people do it in the privacy, they're not identified, and they're kind of revealing what they believe, but probably aren't really willing to defend. So I think in their heart of hearts, the vast majority of practicing or identifying Christians at least sense that pornography is not good, it's not ideal, it's against God's design. But I think in some of the stats, we might get into this. There's some of the ones that just surprised me. About 49% of practicing Christians comfortable with their level of pornography use. And these aren't people like I would say I'm comfortable with it because I don't look at pornography, but these are people who look at pornography and are comfortable with it and are practicing Christians. I mean, more than half of practicing Christians agree a person can regularly view porn and live a sexually healthy life. I mean, what is happening there? I think probably if I had to guess, they know there's something not ideal about it, but have just kind of given up and thought, you know what? I can't stop. I don't have the resources. At least I'm not fill in the blank. So rather than comparing this to God's standard, which I think most Christians know, they're kind of just comparing it to at least I'm not having an affair. At least I'm not looking at maybe a certain kind of pornography. It's really a comparison game. So partly what I do in my talks is I don't want to shame people, but I want to alert them to, do you realize how unbiblical this is? Do you realize the damage of this? Do you realize the lies at the root of this is the key point that I'm drawing out in the study? And I think that point still stands.
I think you're spot on. There's a lot of rationalization and minimization that goes on where we say, well, I'm not doing X, Y, or Z. So, I mean, yeah, what I'm doing is not great. It's not ideal. It's, if you held me to it, I would say, yes, it's sinful, but it's not that stuff. And I know, honestly, that was part of my story. And I think that rationalization that enabled me to keep in that binge purge cycle and not find help, because I would say, well, I'm not looking at violent stuff. I don't like the things that are graphic. Like, I don't get into hardcore stuff. I get tripped up by images of beautiful women. And there's some of those lines of reasoning that God made beauty and God designed it. And hey, I just can't help myself sometimes. So you so rationalize where you're at. But what I have found is I've worked with so many men in groups is that wherever we're at, we just do that to the next level of behavior. And so even the guy that's having an affair, I've heard him say, well, at least I wasn't, doing illegal things, or it wasn't with minors. I wasn't getting arrested. And we just keep, as we progress in our behaviors, we just keep moving the line further ahead and saying, well, at least it's not. And so I think you're exactly right. We need to kind of come back to some fundamental ideas here and say, wait a minute. This isn't a comparison game. And that's never how God has viewed our world or our behaviors, is in comparison to others. That we need to come back and see his standards and his call on our lives and the things he created our bodies for and the things he didn't, and be willing to evaluate the behavior based on that and not based on what others around us may or may not be doing.
Yeah, I was thinking as you guys were talking, I'm like, because you hear these stats, you're like, okay, based off my experience of working with people and my own sexual history, where could this be coming from? And I thought of two things. When I was living in my struggle, it would be I'd act out sexually with a person once a year, not every week. And so if you were to ask me, like, if I'm comfortable, I didn't know. Now, if I step back and look at the 10-year picture of my history, then I would say, oh, there's a pattern here. I was an addict because when I wasn't doing this, I was actually struggling with food issues or OCD. So there was never a recovered state, really. It was just like swapping addictions. But in that moment, I would have been like, yeah, I'm comfortable, but I still was in the midst of my struggle. Just at that time, I wasn't struggling. And then the other thing I thought about is like, if you haven't broken denial yet, even though you know the struggle's there, the sin struggle, the moral struggle, going back to it over and over, if you were to say, I'm not comfortable with it, then you're admitting you have a problem. Like you go to the doctor's office, it's like, how many glasses of wine a night do you drink? Are you comfortable with your drinking? If you were to say no, then that's the point where you have to do something about it. And so I think some of us lie to ourselves and saying, I'm comfortable with my gaming use. I'm comfortable with my amount of alcohol I use. I'm comfortable with amount, because if we say no, then that's where we have to
admit we need help.
Yeah. And so just thinking about my own, addictive behaviors, what I would have said in those moments.
I think that's well said. And, I have compassion for this. My wife and I were talking last night about how we spend our money. And I'm like, okay, am I comparing myself to others, or are we comparing ourselves to the scripture? Right. These are just honest questions in all areas of lives I think we have to have.